I'm Paul Gunton. I'm Executive Editor at Riviera Maritime Media, and I've been chairing our 2018 Offshore Wind Journal conference. And I've made a few notes on some of the key points that came out of that certainly struck me as being quite significant. I think the first thing was that there was a combination and perhaps a contrast between growth and consolidation. There seemed to be at one time anticipation that the industry is going to grow, and yet at the same time there's going to be consolidation. We're going to see companies getting together. And to me at first those seem like sort of opposites, but in a way they're both two sides of the same coin, that there's a positive mood towards the industry on a global basis, but that it's going to be a different format, different structure from what we see at the moment. I think one of the key developments in 2017 has been zero subsidy bids, particularly in Germany. And those, to many, seem to be a harbinger for good times ahead, that we can at last have an industry that doesn't rely on subsidies. But we got a little bit of a warning that that might not be quite how it seems, because in Germany, where these zero bids, as they've been called, have been prevalent, they do get the transmission thrown in for nothing. So it's not quite what it seems. So I think that was quite a learning point. But expansion into Asia, I mentioned growth, expansion into Asia and the US, that seems to be very much on the agenda, particularly into Asia, China, Taiwan, Japan, countries like that. What's the prospects for that? Possibly with production also moving out into those areas. Those were quite big themes. Now, whether that's going to come in the next 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, wasn't very clear. And also, where's the growth going to come from? Is it going to be Europe spreading out, or, as I mentioned, domestic homegrown growth? There were certainly positive forecasts out to 2030. But there was an admission that these do rely on government policy, and who can really be sure where government policy is going to go in that sort of time frame. But nonetheless, costs are expected to fall, so there was hope in that area. In the US, well, US has got a lot of gas, and so to that extent, the expansion of wind energy in the US isn't perhaps as great as it might be, although onshore wind in the US is a very big business. But offshore wind, the prospects for that growing significantly in the way that it's expected in Asia weren't quite so hyped up. But one of the things in the US that I think struck me and many delegates was a presentation about Jones Act restrictions and how that's going to affect offshore wind operations. And that was really quite eye-opening. There seems to be a certain amount of doubt as to whether offshore wind vessels are actually covered by Jones Act for a variety of reasons, and yet the sector is acting as though it does. Now, I followed up with a speaker after that. Why would you accept that the Jones Act applies if it's not sure that it does? And his view was that the Jones Act lobby, as he put it, is organised and well funded, and that if the offshore wind sector were to challenge that, they would soon come up against a bit of a brick wall. Wind energy, though, is becoming a growing percentage of global energy output. One of the things that concerned me a little bit is that there wasn't much talk about storage systems, although one presenter did talk about batteries. And to my mind, and I put this in the discussion, is that going forward, offshore wind systems are going to have to incorporate some sort of energy storage systems, particularly if, as another presenter suggested, wind energy could eventually become as much as 50% of the electricity supply. You can't afford for that to be too fickle, depending on the weather conditions. And so I think battery storage, and particularly with battery storage becoming lower in price, higher in capacity, I think that that's going to go forward and become an essential part of offshore wind installations. Another thing that was interesting from the discussions was that Statoil, an oil company, is getting quite seriously into offshore wind. And in fact, we learned that it was a couple of Statoil engineers who were behind the initial idea for the high wind floating turbines. They see that as a natural progression from their current business. You know, as oil declines, then offshore wind is going to be taking over from them. We also heard a lot about new technology. We heard about new craft, new access systems. That's quite a big thing. Access systems that can operate in bigger waves. There's a premium, we were told, for vessels that can operate in higher sea states. And so we heard a lot about that. Hydrogen propulsion. That was a new one on me, but one of the vessel concepts had some hydrogen-fueled propulsion within that. Even hybrid, maybe charging batteries on the craft from the wind turbines themselves. Finally, there was a presentation by a class society, and the interesting thing there was that they commented how, 10 years ago, offshore wind was a very minor part, if indeed it was a part of their business at all. And yet now it's quite a significant part. And they have full-time staff devoted to offshore wind operations. And that, to my mind, really shows how offshore wind has come of age and is moving forward. So overall, I found the mood to be positive. I found that there were good prospects. There's a lot of technical innovation going on, and I came away feeling upbeat, which surprised me in many ways. But that I felt was the mood of the conference, and I was glad to be part of it.